Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast. The show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. Most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of Spiritual Dope with your host, Brandon Henley. Let's get right into today's episode.
Hey there, Spiritual Dope. We are on here today with Amie Dean. She is a certified clinical trauma counselor and an ascension coach. She helps driven, empathetic women struggling with self-criticism and not feeling good enough heal their inner child wounds so that they can live an authentic, spiritually awakened life true to their souls. Two things here for you, Amie. First of all, thanks for having a short bio. Second, happy to have you here today. Appreciate it. I know we try to connect you. You travel, kind of around, a good bit. Last time you and I tried to connect, we weren't able to have a strong connection, but happy to, reconnect, right? Sometimes we set these up and we don't connect and then we never hear from each other again. So glad we're able to pick it back up. Thanks for being here today.
Yes, thank you. It really is truly a pleasure to be here. And thank you for being so flexible too. I know I do travel often and just did a Four Corners tour of the US over the past year and back where we started from. So now this is just a new beginning, so to speak.
Great. And you're out in San Diego right now, is that right?
I'm in San Diego. Yes. And this is home base. This is where, this
Nice.
is where what I call home. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So I'd like to start this off with the whole idea that you and I are spirituals for universal energy. Like we're the vessels where, that energy is expressed, right? And the idea is that you and I are going to have a conversation here today. You and I will have our dialogue and we'll figure it out. And then there's going to be somebody else who's listening today that's going to pick something totally different out of what we talked about. And it's going to be exactly what that person needs, maybe for their awakening, maybe to pick themselves off the ground through an awakening, or, not be so, not be so taken aback by their awakening. And what is that message today that's coming through you for that person?
Yeah, well, I love how you put that, by the way, too, that it's almost like this is the channel, right? And people are getting exactly what they need in the moment. So I would say the biggest message is that we all have an inner child, and this inner child within us, its natural state is to be innocent and playful and loving and completely in tune with the joy that we are naturally. But sometimes we have these wounds, and most people, I would say, have wounds, whether or not you've been through trauma, although of course, trauma can make a huge impact on the, I would say the depth of wounds that an inner child part might carry. But with that being said, it's totally 100% healable to work through these wounds that the inner child carries. And often we don't necessarily see this as a stepping point on the spiritual awakening journey. Sometimes, we might go to therapy, for example, and work on our past or heal certain memories. But it really does keep us stuck. These wounds keep us stuck on the spiritual awakening path. So I'd love to impart some insights around that today and how to work through those wounds to heal them so we can awaken to our true nature as love and joy.
Sure. Would you say that these trauma wounds are often blocking us from our spiritual awakening?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say they are. And and also this is maybe a little bit, off in the left field a little bit, but I would say that when we, even work to heal our trauma, this is on a conscious level, right? We're coming to it on a sense of, I know I have this memory or I have this belief and it's keeping me stuck. And so we're coming to therapy, for example, or coaching or however, we end up, moving through, this kind of growth experience. But we don't always know exactly sometimes what is causing our triggers, on the subconscious level. And so there can be some subconscious wounding. I hear a lot from people when they come to see me. It's something like, I've worked through this before. I don't know why, I still have these triggers in my relationship, for example, or why I, still feel like I'm just not happy, in the way that I thought I could be after healing these wounds. And sometimes there's some subconscious factors there that could be keeping, a person from really knowing their wounds and knowing exactly what that inner child might be going through within their heart.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there for sure. Just trying to understand, even accessing that inner child, can be a challenge, right? Admitting that there's an inner child there. And then I'm sure there's plenty of people who will be like, I'm not wounded. I'm fine. But I think that everybody's got a little bit of something, right? Even if it's just a knee scrape. Right. Address it. I think, and I don't know, would you call doing this type of work similar to shadow work? Are they one and the same, or are they different?
Yes. Oh, no, that's a really great point. It is absolutely shadow work, I would say, on the deepest level. I can give you an example too. I'm glad you brought up, how to access the inner child, or just, the difficulty in accessing it sometimes. And I would say that it's a little bit more difficult on your own. But when you're working with someone directly, whether it's a friend or, a therapist or a coach, it can be really helpful to have somebody to see you, right? And to see these different aspects of you showing up. But, for example, I have clients sometimes, they'll come to our session and they'll say, I have nothing to talk about today and there's nothing going on and I'm feeling pretty good, actually. Everything's going fairly well. I mean, it's not great, but it's not bad. And then, we'll do a little bit of digging and we'll start to, go into meditation. Meditation's a really big help in activating the inner child and getting to know her or him, or, whichever, also the inner child can show up as, as an animal sometimes too, right? There's so many different ways that this inner child shows up within us. And so when we are looking at this inner child, sometimes it shows up out of nowhere, in that moment in our work together where that little person inside says, I just need more love. Or I'm not getting the kind of experience that I need right now, or I need a break, or I'm tired of working so hard, or whatever that might be for that person. And typically my client is taken back by it. I see the look of surprise on their face, their eyebrows are raised, and they're confused. Like, I didn't know this was happening inside of me. I thought that everything was actually okay. And then tears, sometimes will come out and they'll, recognize that it's that little self inside coming out and trying to heal, trying to move through the wounding just by being in contact with, that person's higher self. And then that's a lot of the work that I do, is helping people contact their higher self so they can connect with their inner child. Sure.
No, I think that's pretty, one of the things that I noticed in doing some of this work is exactly what you're saying. We're really good at lying to ourselves. I'm fine. I'm great. I'm doing everything I need to be doing. And it's when you have somebody else out there asking you that second question. It could be your spouse, it could be anybody that's willing to kind of ask you the second questions. But typically we're really good at lying to ourselves, and we feel like we're just fine. And it's not until somebody asks you what's beyond that question. Another thing that I found is that we've got a narrative that we don't realize that there are holes in, right? And we go and we share that narrative with a coach such as yourself, or somebody that, that we're working with. And those questions that there's that blank hole in the narrative, they get asked, and we're like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that was missing. I've been driving around with 3 wheels, right? Instead of 4 type of thing. So, very cool. What, I'd love to talk about the journey to where you are today, to the work that you're doing. So how did you find yourself in this line of work? Start wherever you want.
Yeah. Oh, what a great question. So I would say that I've always been drawn to, I could even start really young. I was 6 years old teaching my little sister to read. And I was thinking, I'm going to be a teacher someday. This is what I'm going to do. I just knew it. And not in the way, of course, that I am a teacher now. But as time went on, I realized I have something to share. I have something I want to, impart to others. And I really felt like a helper. And for a while there, I didn't know what that looked like. And I didn't know what that would exactly feel like. But I decided, to become a coach. I just realized, it just feels right. I feel like I just enjoy talking with people in this way. And I was helping, my friends would come to me naturally, and ask for advice. And I realized, okay, maybe I have a knack for this, and decided to become a coach and did some coaching training, and then realized I had a client actually who changed things for me pretty dramatically. This client came to me with a lot of mental health issues and a lot of challenges that they were seeing a therapist for, and then seeing me separately as their coach. And I learned a lot from her in the recognition that the coaching work I was doing was really limited. As much as I wanted to help, heal mind, body, spirit, and I felt there was a huge integrative connection with that, I just didn't have the skills. I didn't have the resources, as a coach. So I decided, okay, this matters to me. I know there's absolutely need to have a much bigger picture, I think, in order to understand how to heal and how to work through things, not just on, the spiritual, emotional level, but I think if I understand the mental, side of things, the psychological side, then it would make a big difference for me. So I looked into going to graduate school, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to become a psychotherapist and I'm going to make this work. And I moved from Florida to California and went to school at a really small transpersonal, more holistic psychotherapy school. And from there, realized that this was my path, that I was always meant to integrate psychology and spirituality together. And then spent, a couple years really, learning therapy and what that was like, and understanding, the holistic side of that too, which was excellent, which 100% connects with coaching in that way. But then I realized I really want to do coaching still. So then I just began doing both and realized there's a way you can do that. So I think, it just took me some time to realize that clients had a certain need, right, for a mind, body, spirit connection. And I didn't have the skills at the time to do that. But after, going to therapy school, realized that that was going to make a big difference, I think, for the clients that I was going to work with. And of course, I want to mention, something important too, just in a vulnerable way. I had to go through a lot of my own trauma healing during this journey. So as I was talking with that client, rewinding back to that coaching client, I recognized in her, there was some mirroring trauma showing up in me. And I realized, I thought that was healed. I thought I had healed my own trauma around this, and it had brought up, a lot of triggers for me. And so it was a journey. It wasn't just how do I learn to help others heal? But through that, I was learning how to truly heal myself. And it was a journey I never, ever could have anticipated. But I discovered, who I really am through that process. So I know it's a long journey, but I think that kind of sums up, the main points of it.
Right. No, it does. And it's great that you already knew at a young age that, hey, you wanted to help and kind of facilitate others learning and coming along their journeys. Mm-hmm. And, so you go to psychotherapist route, mm-hmm. and then you end up at this transpersonal holistic school. I've never even heard of such a thing. So I love that idea. Can you talk a little bit more about what that education was like? Because again, when I think of somebody going to a psychotherapist school, I think of like this I don't know, white-walled clinical studies, that type of thing, white jacket. And when you say transpersonal holistic school, I think burning sage and, dream catchers. So I'd love to know just like a little bit of how those two merged for you. And I mean, what drew you more to the spiritual side versus going straight clinical?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one too. So the school I went to is called Sophia University in Palo Alto, California. And the school itself it's kind of like a cohort model, and it's very different. You're right. It's not like the white wall clinical idea, sit in a classroom and, listen to a lecture kind of thing. It was more of we're all sitting in a circle together, and it was a very small cohort, of, sometimes even 5 people in a classroom. And it was very experiential. And we did a lot of art therapy and getting to know ourselves through meditation and, and using other kinds of therapy that you probably wouldn't have heard, wouldn't hear of most times, like internal family systems or psychosynthesis and all these different, they're just pointing to understanding that there is a core self and there is an us in here, that's beyond our personality. That's beyond who we think we are. And so you're right. There was, this idea of the burning of sage and, and understanding, how to actually bring, crystals into some of the work that we do. And, on a very deep level, it was very connective, right? It was more of a relational experience, with therapy and understanding, our approach. And, more so than here's what you need to learn. Now go out and try to make that a reality. It was more like, you're going to learn it here. You're going to get the experience here, and you're going to take that right into the next stage of your therapy work. So it felt more integrative for me, just bringing that all together. We did a lot of, inner somatic body work and understanding how our body, connects with our mind and our spirit, and really getting a hold on who we are as therapists, not so much as this is what a therapist is, right? If that makes sense, a little bit more of an identity, experience around that. So that was that school. And I would say I would never, ever go back. I had no regrets around that. I think that was exactly what I needed. And leading up to why I went there and my spiritual journey, to get there was, I'm definitely an empath. I've always been very highly sensitive. So I've always picked up on emotions of others, quite frequently. And it really caused me a lot of anxiety growing up. So I had a lot of anxiety as a young child. I had no idea how to manage it or how to cope with it. And so as time had gone on, I realized that I was also having, these psychic experiences in addition to the anxiety. And so then I was really freaked out, of course, right, as a young child, and no understanding as to what that means. I'm seeing my grandmother who had passed in the living room, and I'm having anxiety getting up every day. And so I just didn't really know how to sort through the experience, but I felt a draw anyway. I felt a draw to, how do I figure this out? Who is this in me? Or what's happening inside of me? And that's when I, started embarking on, a totally different journey than my upbringing, which was Christian at the time. And at that point realized, I would say maybe in my late teens, it didn't really, connect with my needs. It wasn't something that was really helping me thrive and understand who I am as a soul. And so I would say at that point started looking into different spiritual books, and, leaders such as Neil Donald Walsh was a really big life changer for me. I would say Abraham, Hicks, that kind of, experience too, more a manifestation, Louise Hay, all these different authors really gave me an understanding that there's more to life than what we see and what we experience. And then my anxiety started to subside. And I started to feel better, and I started to understand my psychic abilities a lot more and realize, okay, I'm different. Maybe I'm not the same as a lot of people I know, but it's not bad different, right? So I had to learn through that, that it was just who I am, and that a lot of other people were also struggling with that as well out there, right? And feeling empathic and not knowing what to do with it. So that led me to, that's obviously the long journey led me to discovering who I am, really, truly feeling who I am and having a clear sense of, self-awareness within. And then I decided this is my path. This is number one for me. I just felt this was my purpose. And it was like nothing could shake that. Nothing could shake the knowing that this is my purpose now, to awaken spiritually and to help others do the same. Yeah.
So lots in there, right? All good stuff. A couple things that I want to hit on is you mentioned integrative quite a bit, and I believe that one of the biggest challenges that we have, especially in Western civilization / culture, is our ability to integrate spirituality with everyday life. We've got this spiritual life, and then we've got like this other life. And I was listening to, who was I? I was listening to Alan Watts the other day, and he was talking about Hinduism, how in Hinduism, that's the same, like there is no separation. No. Right. So what, when you say integrative, what do you mean by that? And is it along those lines? And is that kind of some of the work that you're trying to do, is get people to integrate their spirituality with the whole of who they are?
Yes. Excellent. That is exactly what I'm pointing to. It's really all about how can we stop separating our life, right? How can we actually start to see that our spiritual life or our meditative life, right, is the same as our everyday life, right? The life where we have the to-do list of so many things we have to check off every day and responsibilities, right? That are absolutely 100%, needed. And what I find through this is mindfulness. Well, I'm also a mindfulness teacher, so I'm a huge, proponent on helping to bring people to this understanding that the more mindful we can be, the more we can bring spirituality into our everyday life and integrate it more. And that doesn't look like, for example, necessarily sitting on a meditation cushion for 30 minutes a day, getting up and then doing the rest of your day and then going to bed and feeling exhausted, right, by the end of the day. But it's more of, how do I want to start my day mindfully? What does that look like for each person? Maybe, for each person, it's more of an informal mindfulness practice of, I'm going to make my coffee, right? With awareness. I'm going to smell that cup of coffee. I'm going to really be with it. I'm going to find gratitude in the moment of it. And I'm going to, do my sitting meditation maybe, but the rest of the day, I'm going to make an intention to really notice what's happening in my mind. What's happening in my body? What's showing up for me right now? And how can I tend to that compassionately as I go through the day? Because that's huge, I think, too. If we can be compassionate with ourselves, then we can, bring the spiritual dimension into our everyday life, because that's the dimension of love, right? Helping us to reconnect with who we are.
No, that's solid, right? So just bringing it all in. I think another piece too that you're talking about, you're bringing in the mindfulness, you're talking about the meditation. To me, it sounds like you're talking about overall wellness, which is kind of what's meant by holistic. And, if you would just say whole self, right? Or all of these things that, are generally going to benefit you as a holistic practice versus, I think what we look at is the acute doctor. When you go to a doctor, you get, they work on, your hand hurts. We've got a specialist for that. And for that person, everything's going to be about the hand, right? Because that's what they specialize in. And for them, the hammer nails thing. And then I love the idea too, setting the intentions, and you said tend to it, which I like. I like the tend to it versus nurturing piece.
Yeah.
A lot of people are always talking about, you got to nurture this, you got to nurture that, nurture, and that's great. Yeah, you got to nurture to a lot of things, but when you tend to your garden, you sometimes you pull some weeds, right? Sometimes you gotta clear some space. Sometimes you gotta make way for the things that you are nurturing, and in the whole, you're tending to it. So I think that's a great word to use. And then, I have a great question. A question I've been asked before, and I'm really curious what your take is on it. Is, what would you say the difference is? You brought up the word awareness, and we're talking about mindfulness, but what would you say the difference between those two are?
Yeah. Oh, great. So I would say that mindfulness, so being mindful, is just simply paying attention to the present moment, and what's happening in the now, right? So for example, it's hearing the sounds in the room, right? Or feeling yourself in the chair. It's just being mindful of what's happening moment by moment. And that, in my experience anyway, creates self-awareness. So mindfulness kind of leads to self-awareness, and self-awareness would be, acknowledging, there's thoughts in here that maybe really don't connect, with who I really feel myself to be. Right. As you mentioned, I love that metaphor around the garden, right? Tending to the garden in this way. And it's, if every day we were to wake up and say, okay, I've got a garden, right, in one way, and this garden has some weeds in it because I'm human and that happens. And I might need to, work through that today. But how can I tend to that garden, right? The inner garden, so to speak, as I go throughout my day, noticing those weeds, tending to them, as you mentioned, right? Just being with them, and not maybe, I know often we tend to be in a rush, right? We tend to be busy. We tend to try and make things happen as quickly as we can because we want to get more done, right? It's just our culture in many ways, but we're missing that attending, right, to ourselves when we're doing that, when we're so doing focused instead of being focused. Right. And so the more being focused we can be, which is just, simply being mindful, then we are truly, gaining self-awareness and understanding more of what's happening inside, because that's the first step towards healing the inner child, or any kind of healing truly is self-awareness, because without that, we're going to get lost, right? We're going to be walking in circles, and we're going to keep running through the same old cycles that have kept us stuck, right, in the past.
No, for sure. I think that's a great way of putting it. Yeah. So I appreciate that. And then, also threw in there the idea of, we're so busy. Like, I gotta do this. I've got to run to the next thing. I've got to go do that. But busy doesn't always, and we equate busy, working on the things, with being productive. Right. And sometimes going back to the garden, right? Like you don't rip out the corn to see if it's growing, right? You don't rip it out, take a look at the roots to see if it's growing. You leave it, to let it kind of do its thing, and you sit back and know again that you've got to do these other pieces in order to let it go ahead and be. One of the things I want to touch on too is, you brought up your Christian background. Also notice that you do Akashic work. You're doing all this other work again. You're smudging. You've got dream catchers. You've got like all these other things going on. How does your family take, kind of where you're focused at right now? Because I think a big part of doing these journeys and getting into this space, sometimes we meet with resistance from family or friends who are like, what do you mean you're doing this? And it's like you're put in a position to defend like your purpose and what you feel like your purpose is, right? So what was that journey like for you?
Oh yeah, that was a journey. So I will tell you that. I know at first, so one thing about my family is that they are very open-minded. So that's a positive. Now, my mom was not very open-minded at first. She was more, geared towards the Christianity and trying to help me, kind of pivot my way back a little bit, as I've grown through this journey. But my dad was always 100% open. He's like, tell me more about this. Let's read the spiritual book together. The Akashic Records. Let's do a reading. So I think his kind of openness, and his true curiosity around it was something that helped me to recognize that it's okay for me to explore these things. And I know not everyone has that, like one parent or a friend or somebody that says, go for it. What do you have to lose? Figure out what works for you, kind of thing. Right. And my mom was on the opposite spectrum. She's like, don't do that. That's a sin and you can't read that book and you can't do those things. And so there was like a push pull in me for a while. I was like, Dad is good with this. Mom is not so good with this. Right. And I had to kind of move through this experience of, how do I be fully authentic within myself, right? While not, creating chaos right, in my family around this. And over time, for a while there, I just had to learn how to speak my truth and be authentic with my mom and really just share with her my experience of it and also help her to see that it didn't negate her experience, right? That it's okay for her to feel the way she feels and to have her Christian beliefs and to really connect with those and that they're really not all that different. There's just different perspectives around it, right? And so she opened up a lot. I think after a few years, she realized, oh, this is just who my daughter is now, and I have to kind of accept that. And so there was this acceptance piece that she was coming to around it. And then she'd say things to me like, well, tell me more about that. I want to know more about that retreat you went on or that shamanic death and dying workshop that you did. It's like things like that where, my mom would never have asked that. So I could tell that she was growing through my process of growth. And I tend to see that often with the clients I work with too, and in their families. Sometimes it'll mirror their experience when they're healing. Eventually there's pushback, and there usually is, some difficulty or a lot of difficulty in how other people, experience your experience. But sometimes there's a mirroring effect where you can start to realize that, oh, other people actually, they're growing with me. We're growing together through this. It doesn't mean we're always going to be on the same page, but it does mean that sometimes, we can come together a bit more. And so my mom still has her same beliefs. She's not going to the other side necessarily with me, but she is so open to it. And she just tells me, how happy she is for me, that I'm on my purpose and that I'm living my dream and that I'm doing the things that really matter to me. And it took a while for her to get there. It really did. And it wasn't something I was really holding out for, as I was doing, my own trauma healing work. I realized, I want my mom's approval, right? Of course, as I was going through this and recognized, it's actually okay for my mom to be where she is right now with this and for me to be where I am with this because I have to do my own healing work with this. Like, this is important for me. And I think over time, my mom just recognized that it was okay for me to be who I am because she loved me anyway. right? Not everyone's going to have that experience, I think, of course, but having, like you had mentioned, a good friend or maybe your spouse or something like that can make a huge impact. And I'll also add in that my spouse he is not necessarily, involved in the same things I am. He's not like, oh yeah, let's go to a meditation retreat this weekend, but he's 100% supportive. And I think that's the difference, right? We just need to have at least a few people in our lives who are kind of our cheerleaders, right? They're like, I'm here for you. You've got this. And I love you for who you are, because that touches on the wound, the people who don't love us for who we are. Then it activates our shame wound of our inner child, right? Around not being good enough. And it can absolutely hinder our spiritual journey, right? And maybe even, make us decide that we don't even want to, embark on that path because it's too hard or because our family doesn't understand or doesn't agree with it, right? On a deep level. So yeah, it's a really good question though, that you brought up.
So for like, right. The challenge here, especially when you're leaning into something non-conventional, right? I think that's the best way to put it. Larger percentage of the world is Christian, and even a large percentage of them don't realize that the Bible is kind of like a Snow White remake, right? Of all of the things that came before it, right? And it's like all the same exact stories are in there, but like just because it's over here in this book, it means something different than it ever meant before. So it sounds like, she's got that genuine curiosity because she's seeing the kind of alignment. And she's like, all right, well, you know what? The path that you're on actually aligns kind of really well to everything I already know. I'm not sure she's ever said that like out loud, but I'd also have to go to the idea of, I'm a parent, and the general thing that I would have to say is, it's just wanting to make sure that your child is okay, right? Be like, it's not even so much of like, worried about, you more so like, just wanting to make sure you're okay. And so, I mean, to me, that's what it sounds like. And it's great that, that your dad was kind of there going through and being genuinely interested, sitting down, going through and looking through Akashic stuff with you as well. That's kind of fun. And you talked a little bit about, too, this idea of not holding on to needing her acceptance or their acceptance. And I think that's really a powerful thing as well. The idea of, sure, you would love it if they understood and they were there with you in your journey, and that might be something kind of meaningful.
Yeah.
But you're not attached to that, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to do it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your happiness is derived from their approval. Right. And I think that's a big challenge. And I mean, that good on you for kind of, being able to make those breaks. And even in that, what else was there? Just that where was it? The idea that doesn't negate the truth of who she is. Right. Like, so your mom, doesn't, she can still have her journey. You've got yours. And again, that's another thing that I experienced myself and have, seen from others. Like, this is the way, follow me. Right. Like, if you're not going this way, then, you're not living the truth of who you are. Right. And so being able to look at others and realize that they're all on their journey, you're on yours. If you guys all meet, I think about it kind of like in the idea of, Wizard of Oz, right? Yeah. We all kind of meet along the way to Oz, and you're going to Oz to get a brain, you're going for a heart. I just want to go home, right? And but like everybody's kind of on their own individual journey for their own individual reasons. So, really cool story. I enjoy it. And then another big piece of that is a lot of us face that, right? We face this wall of, I really want to step into the truth of who I am, right? I really want to go do this thing, but I'm not sure that X, Y, Z are going to accept it, right? Or what is everybody going to say? And the truth of the matter is, like, do you want to sit there and lay in bed at night being like, why aren't I living out my life the way I want to? And, so thank you for sharing that journey. And hopefully, like I said, that's going to be helpful for others who are kind of in that same space and place or a similar journey to know what some of the positive steps that they can take. And I'll also caveat that when I say positive, I don't mean like, it's always going to have a joyous outcome. It means that there's forward progress. When I say positive, there's you're moving forward, you're getting unstuck, you're moving towards wherever you're trying to move to.
Yeah.
So let's say, I reach out to you, Amie, and I'm like, I want to do some work with you. Walk me through like an introductory session and what we might talk about.
Absolutely. So there are two avenues to that. And one avenue is, just spending some time first in like a consultation. So it would be a phone call to decide, number one, is coaching right for you or is counseling right for you? Because, and there's two different layers of this, right? So for example, therapy tends to be better for, an individual who is kind of in a stage where maybe they haven't done a lot of therapy already before, or they have, but they still have some very traumatic wounds that they're stuck in. It's almost like the survival stage, right? That they're trying to move through. And so that's, typically therapy, right? Where we want to actually get down to the bottom of it. What is this core wound? What are some of these things that are, these memories and past, experiences that are causing this wound? So that's more of like the therapy side of it. So, and that's also if, a person's experiencing, extreme anxiety or depression, or they're really having a hard time, functioning on a more balanced level in their everyday life. Now, coaching is for people who say, you know what, I know I still have wounds to heal, or I'm pretty sure I do. And I'd like to find out more about what that looks like. But kind of similar to what you mentioned before, it's for those truth seekers almost, right? The ones who are ready to kind of deepen their spiritual journey, a bit more, and they want to connect with like-minded people, because the coaching I do is within a group setting with other women. And in this setting, this is a place to truly heal together, because we're not on the spiritual awakening journey alone, right? We're not meant to be anyway. We're supposed to connect and heal through each other's stories and heal through each other's wisdom and compassion. So I would say that the major difference is, therapy is kind of a stepping stone to the coaching work I do, because it does help to have a really clear understanding of the whys, why I went through this, and the hows, and to have the coping, skills and resources. And then the coaching is that next level to say, but, I got a really clear sense and my life is, a little more balanced or a lot more balanced. And now I'm ready. I'm ready to really dive into who am I really? What is my life purpose? Like, what is most important to me as a spiritual being? And how can I bring spirituality as the main source of my life? Right? How can I truly understand who I am? And so that would be, I think, that next level, and often in the consultation, I can help, a person discover more about that and understand, where they're at if they're unsure, where they're at in this journey. But that's usually the first step, I would say, to the process. Yeah.
So we've determined that I am, I'm fresh out of survival mode, right? And I'm ready to go on to this coaching. I'm ready to deepen my spiritual journey. I love that you're creating space, and you're working primarily with women. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, primarily with women with, it doesn't have to be developmental trauma, but women who have had some kind of level of trauma or difficulty in, or just maybe processing through certain life events that they've been through. Mm-hmm. So, and usually, of course, it always stems in childhood, even if they don't have a core memory that connects to that just yet.
So how do you help them connect to that core memory? What's something that you do for that?
Yeah. So not usually in the consultation, usually this happens in our first, session together. We spend some time, creating these building blocks around what are some of these memories you do remember? What are some things that do come to mind, right? That make sense for you. And then we just go a little bit deeper and we go backwards in time together. So I use a meditative technique with visualization. And I use something called internal family systems as well. It's a form of therapy that allows you to go deep into your psyche to understand different subpersonalities. And these are just simply, different parts of us that show up in our everyday life, like our critic, our perfectionist, our, let's say, there's a part of you that, wants to, maybe a control part, right? I want to control my everyday experiences and creates anxiety for you. So these are parts we get in touch with and we try to understand how do they connect to your timeline as to when these symptoms began for you, right? So maybe for this person, I started having extreme anxiety at age 10 and I don't know why, right? I don't know what caused it. So we'll just start to explore what happened, around that time frame. So it's very similar to therapy in this way too, in discovering the core wound. But then we go into, the Akashic records, and then we discover more of the whys and the hows around this core wound. And then more memories start to become more obvious.
Thanks, Amie. Because I was waiting to get to the Akashic records. I'm like, can we just heal all this shit and get to the Akashic records? Because I'm ready.
Let's go there.
Right. Let's talk about the Akashic records. What would you say they are, and how do your clients usually kind of react to what they are, versus what their perception of that is?
Yes. So typically, it's really interesting. There's such a big interest now in the Akashic records, and most people are like, I don't really know what it is, but I just want to figure out how to access mine, right? Because it sounds so cool to know more about who I am and to ask questions to understand my spiritual side. But the Akashic records really it's just this etheric library of our inner world, right? So I know sometimes you can think of the Akashic records as out there somewhere, right? Somewhere out there, but they're really within us, and it's within the fifth dimension of consciousness. And typically we're living on the third dimension of consciousness. We can think of it that way. And the third dimension is very physical. We have a lot to do. This is that state of got to get things done. We're time limited. And as we move up into, the fourth dimension is more of the astral plane, which helps us to launch into the fifth dimension of love, which is where the Akashic records exist. From here, we're able to actually understand more of our life purpose, understand why we went through what we went through from a place of love, which is why it's such an amazing, opportunity to heal. But some people, they see their Akashic records as like a giant library of information because it holds all of your soul's records from all time. So for those who believe in past lives, it holds your past lives, future possibilities of what could happen in the future, your life purpose, your soul contract as to why we came here and why we're doing what we're doing and the kind of karma that we might need to work through. So it has an immense amount of information here. It's like the internet, but within you of information, so to speak. And it's powerful, really powerful.
So do you access my Akashic records, or do you help me to access them, and then what? What happened? Where are we at there?
Yes. Oh, I like this question. So for a while I was doing one-to-one readings for people and doing community readings for people, and recognized that it wasn't really helping to, provide the tools that were necessary. So what I do is I help people directly. So I would guide you, and help you access your Akashic records, but I'd be in there with you. Hopefully that makes sense. So it almost, so the way that this works is there's a prayer process, and this prayer process helps you to get in touch with the truth of your essence, right? The love that you are. And because of that, you're able to, dive deeper into this love, right? The dimension of love in this way. And so the prayer is kind of like a vibrational frequency almost, that we go into together. So you would say that prayer, for example, right? Out loud. And I would, stand, kind of sit with you, hold the space with you, and then you would access your Akashic records at that same time. Usually for some people, they see light, right, open up after the prayer, for example. Some people see the library of books show up around them, but there's a lot of different things that can happen in this way. So with that being said, I'm there as a support in the background, trying to help in any way I can. And sometimes I will get information, and I'll pull it in and I'll say, what about this? What do you think about that? And then, people can let me know if they're on the same page, if they feel that too, right? If they're also sensing those changes within them. So yeah.
Would you say it's a little bit like, would you say it's a little bit like when Morpheus is in there with Neo and he's like, stop trying to hit me and just hit me, right? That type of thing. And then he just kind of back away and he does his own thing.
Oh yeah. Right. That's it,
right.
All the way. Exactly. Yeah. I love that analogy. Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. It's a joint, it's kind of like teamwork, in some way in this process, because I don't want to just go into your records. I was doing this for a while, and then everyone has to keep coming to me for information in their records. And I just didn't feel like that was empowering, really. And I
Right.
realized everybody can access their records. I don't need to do that for them, but I want to empower them to know how to do that. So more of a teacher, I think, in this way than a reader like I was in the past. Yeah.
No, and that's great. I'm going to even spin all the way back kind of to the beginning of the conversation where you talked a little bit about recognizing kind of how you had these psychic abilities, and that made you different.
Yes.
And I would almost hesitate to say,
Yeah.
you were aware of your psychic abilities,
Yes.
that I think are innate in everybody.
Yeah.
Right. It's just you chose to kind of chase the path and give yourself to that. And, through things like, what you're doing, with teaching them how to access the Akashic records, you're like, hey, listen, it's not just me.
Yeah.
Right. I'm capable, you're capable, and here's how, and here's what this looks like, and just kind of, give yourself openness to that.
Exactly.
So no, I love what you're doing. I definitely think it's very cool. What, who would you say is kind of like your ideal client?
Yeah. So I would say that, so there's a couple different clients that might be, interested in this work and interested in this healing. Usually it's a person, number one, they're highly spiritually dedicated. I usually work with a lot of spiritually dedicated women who, not to say that they feel like their spiritual life is on track, but they want their spiritual life to be on track, right? Maybe they want, more meditation and yoga and more of an understanding of how to deepen, right, their understanding of who they are, but they're not quite there, right? So there's those people who are ready, but they don't know the path. They're like, help me figure it out. I'm confused, right, about how to make this happen. So there's that. And then typically these women tend to be highly self-critical. They tend to, be really hard on themselves, sometimes perfectionistic in certain ways, and tend to experience, anxiety quite a bit as well. They might also be empaths, and really, tapping into other people's emotions on a regular basis. So these women usually too, they are busy people, right? They're spending a lot of time, just trying to make things happen. And maybe they have families that they're trying to, balance out with work and their spiritual life. And, coming back to our conversation around integration, they're thinking, how on earth, right, do I integrate my spiritual life into my everyday life of being a parent, of being a friend, of being a entrepreneur, maybe, of being a business owner, or, even being an employee? How do I figure this out, right? How do I really understand my path and my purpose in this? So it's usually people who they're just ready, really, they're just ready to step into their light, and they're ready, they're tired of living in that third dimension, is one way of thinking of it, living so heavily in that third dimension of consciousness that the dimension of love within them, that fifth dimension, is not present in the way that they would hope. So that would be the right person.
Thanks for sharing that. Right. So just so that people who are listening and tuned in today, they have an idea of whether or not, that's a great fit. One other thing that I like to do here is just kind of look at this podcast as kind of like, a spiritual speed dating show, right? Cause they're going to tune in. They're looking for their next spiritual, date, as it were. They're looking for, and I think another thing is even in the idea of, I'll go back to Hinduism, you can have more than one guru, right? It's like, you go to like one and you hang out with them for a while and you awaken certain aspects of yourself. And that's what that guru does. That's what that teacher does. And so it's okay to move on. And so my guess is, like, you're not trying to hold these clients for life. It's like, all right, come get what you need and move on, right? Like, you've got what you need from me. I've given you all I can give now. Scoot. Right. So, as people are kind of going on their paths, this would be, I think one or two of the questions that I would ask. Let's see. What do we have to ask for spiritual bachelorette number one today? Let's say, how does one obtain true peace?
Oh, I love it. How does one obtain true peace? I would say the best way to obtain true peace is to acknowledge the human condition first and foremost, which is this negativity bias to not have true peace, right? Coming back to that shadow work, right, that we all need to do, I think, on a very deep level. that, we're one part of us, for example, wants peace. One part of us or several parts of us do not want peace, right? For example, some parts of us want to be angry. Some parts of us want to be, in a state of fear, right? And some parts of us really want peace. So first maybe is to acknowledge this kind of multiplicity of our personality, right? Where we're not just one person. And, the way to obtain that is to make peace, for lack of a better word, make peace with the parts of us that do not want peace, if that makes sense, right? Make peace with the parts of us that need some time to be in anger, to stew in things sometimes, to really allow that sense of mindfulness, right? To bring that to our experience instead of forcing ourselves, right? To move past it, which is spiritual bypass, right? Just to get to that true peace state. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, it's a journey for sure.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. In the idea of you said two things there. I'm not super deep on spiritual bypassing, but that would be the idea of saying, exactly what you said. Well, there's anger over there, and I shouldn't have that in my life. There's this over there, and that shouldn't be in my life. Like, there's like spiritual bypassing is like, when you're at the buffet and there's like all the things there, which makes the full buffet what it is. And then you're like, well, that shouldn't be on there. I'm not having any of that. That shouldn't be on there. I'm going to fill my plate with all the spiritual things that I think I'm supposed to have, but no pudding, right? I can't have pudding. I love pudding, but I can't have pudding. Right. And what I found through the shadow work is understanding there's, just like you said, anger may sound like an oxymoron. Right. It's kind of part of peace, right? You can't ignore that you're feeling angry. If you ignore that you're feeling angry, then there's always going to be a disturbance. You're never going to be peaceful. It's like, if I'm angry, why am I angry? What's up there? Should I keep feeling it? Okay, I'm feeling it. Yeah. I'm over it, right? Yeah, I'm pretty angry, but I'm over it, right? Like, but to try and reject it and suppress it is gonna make it a lot like a geyser in the end.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. That's it. Yeah.
Never thrown pudding into a spiritual conversation before, but there it is.
There it is. It just comes up on its own, right?
That's right. Let's see. Trying to find one that I don't always ask. Yeah. Let's see. I need a longer to do. What does it mean to live in the present moment?
Ooh, what does it mean to live in the present moment? I would say to live in the present moment means to be 100%. So this is kind of a number one, of course, coming back to living moment by moment, right? So reminding yourself that it's not necessarily that you're not thinking about the future, and it's not necessarily that you're not thinking about the past, because these are thoughts that are happening, right? Thoughts happen on their own. We're not thinking thoughts necessarily. They're just coming in, right? So it's more about, can I be aware? Can I be open? Can I be just, self-aware in the moment of what's coming up for me? For example, that my thoughts are going to the future, that my thoughts are going to the past, right? It's this recognition that as we're present with our body, for example, right? Noticing sensation, noticing emotion. Can I allow that to be? Right? It's really the aspect of surrender, I would say, because you have to surrender in order to be present. Because, the idea of not being present is the opposite of surrender, right? It's about control. It's about trying to fix. It's about trying to jump into the future in some way. And in this instance, when we're trying to be present, we are understanding that surrender is the way. Therefore, we have to surrender to, this doesn't feel good to be present right now. For example, that anger is showing up and I really don't want to be present with it, but it's here. And therefore, I'm going to invite it into my experience the best way I know how, right? Which is just to maybe be gentle with myself in this moment. So there's that, to be present.
Would you clarify, the word surrender? Because I think a lot of people look at surrender as in giving up, as in not standing up for myself, so when you're saying surrender, what are you saying?
Yes. So surrender is, and I know this is actually a really important conversation because often we can think, well, so we're just surrendering, we're just letting it go and it's no big deal. And as we're doing that, we're just letting go of everything, right? Which means our ability to assert any kind of, maybe not necessarily control, but to assert any kind of influence over our lives in some sort of way. But it's not like that. Surrender is just simply noticing our experience, noticing what's arising, choosing not to fight with it, choosing not to resist it, just allowing it to be. And I know that, it is a process. And for many, they might ask, well, how do I know if I'm resisting it? How do I know if I'm surrendering? Right. And I would say that you're surrendering when there's a sense of openness around your experience, right? There's a sense of just knowing that you're okay as you are in that moment. And there isn't this sense of tension or tightness around a situation, right? For example, if you have to make a big decision, let's say, right? And you're just going back and forth, option A, option B, option A, option B. And you realize, I'm not really surrendering right now because I'm feeling stress about this. I'm feeling tension about this. I'm feeling like I have to figure it out in some way. That would be the opposite of surrender, right? And then surrendering would be, okay, this is how I feel right now. I'm feeling torn. There's a part of me that feels this way. There's a part of me that feels that way. And I can't make a decision in this moment. I'm going to surrender to the knowing that this is the current snapshot of my life right now. And I'm going to be okay with that in this moment, or at least be okay, right, with the knowing that this is going to change because all experiences are temporary in this moment. And so there's that, right? And that can help you see, right, that you are surrendering or not surrendering. But the big key here is that you can't just say, I'm going to surrender and then, okay, fine, I'm not going to make the decision, right? Because you're going to make a decision either way. But the point is that as you create some space around it, a decision is made naturally. It comes intuitively through you in that moment. And it's not based on control. It comes through your higher wisdom is one way of looking at it.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. Right, I think that again, a lot of people are going to look at surrender as just kind of rolling over and letting everything just kind of take over, or they don't have anything that they can do about it. Right. In that regard, you'd mentioned that you had something you'd like to share with the audience, and what was that, Amie?
Yes. So there is a spiritual awakening guidebook that I offer just as a complimentary download on my website. And this guidebook walks you through the 6 phases of spiritual awakening. I know we didn't get to that today, but I have these 6 phases that we go through on our spiritual journey, and it's 100% connected to healing our inner child. And this tells you how to go about healing that, how to work through these challenges that are coming up, and to determine which phase of awakening you're in right now. And of course, there's an option to book a call with me, that consult we talked about earlier, if that feels right. And they can download this. So would it be helpful to give the website information now?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Perfect. So the website is One Awakening. So that's ONE awakening.us/awaken. And right there, you can just download it at that page, and then it's yours. Oh, and there's a journal with it too. I think that's another important piece, a spiritual awakening journal to integrate your daily habits.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I think that's a good point to make. I recall, when I was going through what I would call my awakening process and reaching out to people, right? I was like, who can I talk to about this? And, a couple of the people that I chatted with, it was like, just, also, while you're going through this, sure, there's plenty of materials you can read and lots of things you can do, but one of the things you can do that's very beneficial is to write it out, capture that kind of in the journal, right? And just make sure that you're creating space and time to do that. Mm-hmm. Amie, thanks so much for being on today, making the time. Where can I send other people to connect with you today?
Yes, wonderful. So I would say that, so I do have a Facebook community as well. And so you can go to facebook.com/awakening spiritually together. You can always look that up on Facebook. And I go live every week, every other week, sometimes in the group. And there's spiritual awakening resources in that Facebook group. And I'm also on YouTube as well, which you can find all those links on my website, which you can find once you download that workbook at oneawakening.us/awaken. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for being on today with us, Amie.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure. And thank you to all who are listening. And hopefully this helped with your spiritual awakening journey. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Spiritual Dope Podcast. Stay connected with us directly through spiritualdope.co. You can also join the discussion on Facebook, Spiritual Dope, and Instagram at spiritual_dope. If you would like to speak with us, send us an email through brandon@spiritualdope.co. And as always, thank you for cultivating your mindset and creating a better reality. This concludes the most thought-provoking part of your day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay fully up to date. Until next time, be kind to yourself and trust your intuition.